So, there's this viral video making a pretty strong case against journalist Don Lemon, and it's definitely been stirring up some debate online. But what's the argument, really? We're going to unpack the source material's claims slide by slide and see exactly how they build this case. Okay, so here's the plan. We'll start with the incident at the church, then we'll hear Don Lemon's side of the story, and then we'll really dig into the evidence the source uses to challenge him. After that, we're going to look at how the whole thing is framed, touch on some pretty serious potential federal charges, and wrap up with the source's bigger point about the media in general. Let's dive in.
All right, first things first, the incident at the church. To really get what this source is arguing, we have to start with their version of what actually went down. So the whole thing really hinges on this one event that took place inside a church in St. Paul, Minnesota. But here's the key. It's not just about what happened. It's about the interpretation of what happened. And that's where all the debate really kicks off. And right out of the gate, the source uses some really strong language to frame this. They claim, and I'm quoting directly here, that a group of radical leftist psychos stormed a church service and disgraced fake news journalist Don Lemon was along for the ride. Wow. So yeah, that framing is super deliberate. It's the lens they want you to see everything else through. Okay, so that's one side. But what about Don Lemon? How does he explain being there? The source material actually includes his defense, so let's take a look at his side of the story.
Lemon's whole defense, according to the source, really boils down to one simple idea: journalism. He says, quote, "I had no affiliation to that organization. We were there chronicling protests. It's called journalism." So his argument is that he was just a reporter doing his job. And, as you can probably guess, that claim is the exact thing the source is about to try and take apart. And here's where the source really goes on the attack. To push back on Lemon's claim that he was just an impartial journalist, the video starts dropping what it calls the receipts. Basically, a whole bunch of clips and posts that it says prove there was a much, much deeper connection going on here. So, check this out, because this is really the core of their counter-argument. You've got Lemon's claim, "I had no affiliation." But then the source hits back, alleging that he was actually friends with the organizer, Nikema Armstrong, and even gave her a shout-out on his show right before the event. The implication they're making is pretty clear. This wasn't just journalism. It was coordination. And they don't stop there. The source just keeps stacking up more so-called evidence. They show a Facebook post, supposedly from the organizer, thanking Lemon for his involvement. Then there's a video clip of Lemon himself praising the protesters, saying, "Thank you for your service." And they even pull up a quote from his own show where he talks about their tactics. See, every single piece here is designed to paint a picture of Lemon as an active participant, not some neutral, detached observer. Okay, so once the source feels like it's established Lemon's connection to the group, the argument kind of pivots. It's less about who was there and more about what exactly went down. Was this really a protest, or was it something else entirely? And this right here, this really gets to the heart of the whole disagreement. You've got Lemon's perspective that, hey, protesting is supposed to make people uncomfortable. But the source, they reject that completely. They argue this wasn't a protest at all. It was intimidation. And then they take it a step further, making the pretty extreme claim that it was, and I'm quoting, textbook definitionally terrorism. Now, to really drive home its portrayal of Lemon as an activist, the source throws in another really powerful claim. It alleges that after the event, Lemon basically diagnosed the churchgoers' reaction as entitlement that comes from a white supremacy. And for the source, that's the smoking gun. That's not how a neutral journalist talks. That's the language of someone who's picked a side. Okay, and this is where things get really serious. The source totally raises the stakes. After defining the whole thing as intimidation, it brings in legal commentators to argue that this wasn't just, bad form. They're arguing it was potentially a federal crime. The main law they keep bringing up is something called the FACE Act. And what that is a federal law that basically protects places of religious worship. It makes it a crime to obstruct or intimidate someone who's trying to go to church. But wait, it doesn't stop there. The legal commentators in the videos start floating a whole list of other, frankly, incredibly serious federal charges. We're talking about things like the Klan Act, which is a KKK-era law, conspiracy against rights, damage to religious property. The list goes on. And just to make sure you get their point, the source wraps up this legal section with a super definitive quote from one of the experts. He says, "I saw multiple federal criminal incidents yesterday, and there will be charges." So the message they're sending is crystal clear. This isn't a maybe, it's a for sure.
So what's the big takeaway from all this, according to the source? Well, they use this whole Don Lemon incident as a kind of springboard for their final biggest argument, a huge critique of the entire media landscape.
Yeah, their main point is that this whole thing isn't really just about one guy. For them, this incident is the definitive proof they need to show that big-name journalists aren't unbiased reporters at all. In fact, they call them far-left extremists.
And this is the final thought the source wants to leave you with. They use this entire story to make their case that, quote, it's hard to argue that mainstream journalism is neutral and unbiased when it seems all these people are complete left-wing psychos. It's a really provocative closing statement, for sure. So when you look at the entire case laid out by the source, it really leaves us with a tough question, doesn't it? In a time when we're all so politically divided, where exactly is the line between a journalist covering a story and an activist taking part in it? And maybe more importantly, who gets to draw that line?